Welcome to today's webinar entitled High Performance Building Design. My name is Billy Zadig, Manager of Special Projects for APA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to the APA website later this afternoon. Please visit the APA website for archived webinars that are available for everyone for continuing education credits recognized by local, state, and federal professional entities. Professional continuing education and AIA-CLU certificates are being offered for today's program. If you are an AIA professional, please send an email to me at Billie, B-I-L-L-I-E, @APA.org, along with your AIA membership number if you've not done so in the past. Those who indicated they wanted a certificate at registration and meet the requirements will receive certificates later this afternoon. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by one of our presenters. If you're just calling in, make sure you send me an email at billie@apa.org so I can send you a certificate if you would like one. The system only recognizes you if you log in. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Ryan Bakke and Brendan Frazier. Gentlemen, take it away.
Thank you very much for the introduction.
Hey guys, my name's Brendan Frazier. I am an engineer, mechanical engineer with EUA. And since I love talking to engineers and I know that there's a lot of us on this meeting today, Billy agreed to let me share my favorite engineering joke. So a doctor, a lawyer, and an engineer are all golfing together. The group in front of them is just playing super slow, so they finally go and complain to the marshal. The marshal tells them that he's sorry for the inconvenience, but it's a group of firefighters who, lost their eyesight while they're saving orphans from a burning building. The lawyer is taken aback and he's incredibly apologetic, and he's like, just if they have any legal issues, give them my card. We'll make sure to help them out pro bono. The doctor says the same thing. Any medical issues, let me help them out. So they all turn to the engineer. And the engineer says, it might be more efficient to let them play at night. So with that, I'll kick it over to Ryan.
On that note, my name is Ryan Bakke. I'm an architect with EUA. Brendan forgot to mention he's out of our Atlanta office. I'm out of the Green Bay office. EUA is 265 people plus strong. We're in 5 different locations, mainly within the Midwest. We've got Atlanta, Green Bay, Milwaukee is the headquarters, Madison, and then Denver. I've been in the business a long time, and it's really about figuring out how we help empower you to grow your business. We'd like to drop over to a quick poll. Billy will actually be running this. We've got a couple of questions for you.
I've had some interesting responses to this one in the past.
Yes, indeed. So we're just going to take the temperature of the room and kind of get your feelings about high performance building design and you, quite frankly, and the rest of this conversation will really be around building a case for high performance building, and how to really spread the message as wide and clear.
Nice.
Oh, love it. Got one more question. So yes, I'm so excited is our general sentiment in this room.
And for those of you who are in the Oh No group, don't worry. We're hoping to help you all out with that.
Well, and So Brendan has all the initials for all these high performance things within his engineering discipline. You might have noticed that I don't have any credentials after my name. And so I'm actually coming at this from the standpoint of somebody who has been on, has also led, but doesn't necessarily have all the credentials. And I think the empowering thing is knowing that it doesn't take credentials to do these sorts of projects. It just means that you've gone even deeper into the whole process. Oh yeah. So we're at 50-50, which is really kind of where I was expecting us to be.
I also really like the I don't know, hard to tell, because I know it's unfortunately relatively common where maybe you think you're starting a sustainability project and it sort of just gets pushed to the side and you're not sure what happened. We can address that one too.
Yeah, our learning objectives today are really setting the stage for showing that high performance building design is more than just checking a few check boxes under sustainability. It's also how it ties into your campus philosophy and the business case for your institution. We're going to lay out an approach for this and then have a few Q&A minutes at the end.
So really the base concept that we want to instill today is just a mindset change. We don't want our clients to think of sustainability as just a requirement or a checklist they need to fill out. Even if you are filling out a checklist and it is a design requirement, you should really be approaching it from a concept of using this as an opportunity to make this product better than it would have been if you did not. With any sustainable project and any high performance project, you get to define the goals and you get to set the target. And the way you do that is really to define your campus philosophy. It can be anything. High performance and sustainable growth means a lot more than just saving energy or saving water. It's all of your resources, which includes your budget, it includes your students, it includes your space. So really, we want to give you the knowledge and the tools to be able to put together a sustainable growth plan for your facilities.
Hey, Brendan, one thing that I want to glom onto this, and you may have to nudge me every once in a while as we're going through this, because I realize that I don't see exactly where I'm popping in and popping out of some of these slides. Just to give you a heads up if I'm silent, and it should be my turn to be talking about a data point. But I think a really key thing that we often overlook when we're doing this is we think that data is the starting point. Data is not always the starting point. The story is the starting point. And we believe that one way that you can really make everything that you do a lot more impactful is to really think about the narrative that is being built around high performance building. Which is something that we would highly encourage you to write out for yourself in whatever position you're in. You start with a story, you start with a narrative before you start getting into data points. And what that helps you do is it really helps you spread this narrative that you have far and wide, which will help identify those champions. And once you've identified those champions, they'll actually help push the high performance building design within your organization much further than you would be able to do oftentimes on your own. As part of that, anytime you're doing one of these projects, every stakeholder is learning something that they may not have done before or learned before. And it's really key to see every participant that's working on one of these projects with you as a trusted advisor, just because it's about really elevating each person in this. And over time, by achieving the outcomes that you identify, you start creating this flywheel of success, and the next project becomes a lot easier to just put into the planning works.
Yeah, so unfortunately, sustainability can sometimes be a dirty word. It might elicit feelings of over budget projects or making compromises in order to try to get a box checked. But really what we want you to look at it as a truly sustainable project furthers the project capabilities and preserves your resources. We want to make sure that you are using a planning methodology and you're making sure that your partners are using a design methodology that hits every single one of your goals efficiently. So there's a couple business cases for this. A sustainable project, when done correctly, it should only be beneficial. We know you have limited budgets to work with, and you don't want to spend that on something that you don't need. So when we talk about sustainability, we're not talking about sustainability for the sake of sustainability. We want to make sure that you are getting delivered a better product, the best product that you can with any given budget. Because if we take a step back and we look intrinsically, building a net zero building is kind of easy. You can do that all day long with an unlimited budget, but that's not how it works in the real world. We want to make sure that you are operating as efficiently as you can with whatever design requirements you may implement. And it might sound easy, but it's a very methodical, iterative process. It's from start to finish before you even bring in a consultant. So even just to sort of drive this home, the White Group, they did a study. It's been a while back now, but it's one of my favorite ones to quote, because basically what they looked at is project teams who were given sustainability and sustainable design as a project goal, and projects that used approximately the same budget. And they found that with the same project costs and the same project goals, teams that really used an iterative process saved an additional 15% for essentially free, the same project cost. So effort in planning and keeping track of your goals and following a high performance design process can really, really pay off.
What's really cool about that is it actually ties into tests that have been done on team achievement or team performance. And I think it was a study that was done in the military where they would hide some information from the trainers, where the trainers would come in and they'd be told, well, we can't really, we've done tests on the physical ability of these different candidates or these different folks that are coming into the training facility, but we aren't able to tell you if they were fully accurate. But we really think this group is a high performing group versus kind of the test group. It was a little more obvious, who was a higher performer or a lower performer. The interesting thing is when you go in and you think that everybody can achieve something, you actually get higher rates of success and achievement. So it's interesting how just reframing the performance metrics from well, I don't know if we have enough money to, we'll find a way to get this done, can actually change the result quite a bit. The conventional green mindset, I think Brendan, you touched on this just a little bit ago, is build me a sustainability, build me a net zero energy building, check the box, top down. Really reframing this as a high performance building design lets you look at so many more factors other than just the performance of the buildings, say mechanical systems or electrical systems or your central plant. It's really about looking at each space through a matrix versus a simple checklist, and then based off of that matrix, weighting it such that certain key trends pop to the front, and you see how that then starts meshing with the narrative of where you're trying to go as a campus, as a green design. And so these data markers, they actually give the subjective nature of storytelling, the hard data on the back end, but the hard data itself isn't always a convincing factor. It's really about why it's important, not how it, so this focusing on why, and then how follows behind how supports the why.
Yeah, and if we take a step back to the more traditional definition of sustainable, it's about producing something that can grow and is replicable in a responsible manner without using up your resources. And it's important to remember that, because if you're not building quality products and you're making compromise after compromise, that's not actually sustainable growth. If you're delivering a building that students need to learn in, and there's issues going on every single step of the way, then that detracts from the overall purpose of the building.
So when we approach this, there's really kind of four major topics that we like touching on: goals and financial impact, then aligning the tools, then positioning for your budget requests, and then what happens once the rubber hits the road, once you're in design and construction. Everything that you've got within your campus is either adding value or cuts into your available resources. Really, just going back to what Brendan was just talking about, being able to categorize the different characteristics that are important allows you to rank them, and then as you begin to create this larger picture, it's a lot easier to bring in the stakeholders from outside groups. Sometimes it starts really small, sometimes it starts very large, but it's really about aligning each project with your institution's narrative and with the stakeholder buy-in. And kind of from this messy soup, you start creating what goals are truly necessary in order to achieve that next step in the ladder that you're going towards.
So the first step in this process is taking your philosophy that we just talked about, taking your overall goals, your mentality, your storytelling, and putting it into a definable number. It can be several numbers, but the first step is making sure that you have a target that is measurable. It can be anything you want, and it doesn't necessarily have to be about dollars either. It can also represent, a student body, the amount of, capacity for classes that it has. Anything, as long as it's measurable. And this ends up in your scoping document. It ends up in your OPR. It ends up in the basis of design once you do hire a consultant, and all the way up to the whiteboard that's hanging in the job trailer. That's the first step of getting everybody on the same page, is defining what you define as success.
So once you've taken a look at these different buckets and set your target value, you can look at kind of these four levers that you've got to pull on. You've got campus and space planning, which is an ongoing thing. You've got life cycle cost analysis, where you can look at an individual building or the equipment within a building. Energy auditing is another lever that you've got at your disposal, as well as retro commissioning. Each of these, sometimes they overlap, sometimes they are distinct categories, but those are truly the four levers that you can pull on to amp up your philosophy and your narrative.
Yeah, and it really helps you to make sure that before you even go to the drawing board, or before shovel ever touches dirt, it ensures that the project isn't only feasible, but it's also sellable to whoever you have to convince to spend the money. And even then, sometimes projects do go over budget for a variety of circumstances. Some of them are even outside of our control, especially what we've seen the last year. But with these tools, the best part about them is that they're ever evolving. Once you get the baseline case and you get your baseline data, it can be continually updated. So there's situations, one that I have seen recently actually, where theoretically, if a project is put on the back burner because of a renovation, or a renovation gets put on the back burner because of materials costs, if you have these tools preloaded, you can update them with current materials costs, and it honestly might still make sense. And that's not just to get the project done. It's also, when I'm saying make sense, it might make the most financial sense to go ahead and get that project done. So actually understanding where you're at and where you want to be and the best way to get there is really the first step.
We're going to dive into each of these 4 levers a little bit more. So campus and space planning, it's about the campus master plan, but it goes beyond that. You know, what you really want to do is measure your buildings against your current performance criteria, and anything that's underperforming in one of the categories is something that could be addressed. We had a client that was looking at their overall campus, and it was about, well, how do I attract students? And students look at the landscaping on the campus quite a bit as they're coming on board or as they're coming for a visit, and it just wasn't very appealing. So, you know, one of the things that they did in order to step up to that next level, was to actually address the landscaping and bring it up to the standard that the college actually saw. And that allowed them to attract the caliber of student and actually attract more students than they were otherwise doing in the past. So it was a measurable result. It wasn't necessarily anything about energy use in the buildings, but at the same time, if you have more people in a building, you're technically using less energy per occupant within the building. So, you know, an empty building costs a lot more than a building that's full of students. So, you know, 10 years is too far apart. Every 2 to 5 years is probably a much better range to update the master plan. You know, sometimes you find that you can reposition spaces. You can use evidence-based design as a way to see if the space is performing up to the standards that you require it to. You can look at it from, is this a healthy building, a healthy places criteria? You know, if you start looking through the lens of well or fit well, or even, you know, redless materials sometimes, and then, you know, the occupancy rates of the buildings, too much of one type of space, too little of another type of space, perhaps.
So one of the best tools at your disposal, and you can go out of house for this, and you can also do it in-house. There's many different methodologies and many different things we can measure using a life cycle cost analysis, but at the end of the day, this is one of the most important ones, simply because I know if you're a facility manager, it's definitely frustrating when people are picking apart your budget requests. But on the flip side, it is their job to be fiscally responsible with the university's money. So life cycle cost analysis is the best way to be able to justify spending. This is how you prove the functionality of your campus philosophy. This is how you prove that you need this, that it'll pay for itself. And it doesn't have to be even energy savings. Again, we want to think beyond that. You can do a life cycle cost analysis comparing the construction costs versus the revenue from tuition growth if you were to build a new technology building, say. But once you have your space planning scenario, if you want to really sell it, you need to make sure you know what it's going to cost and what it's going to save. In my earlier example about, you know, continuing to update these numbers to continue to sell it, because as we know, sometimes higher education projects can take forever to come to fruition. So this can grow with you. This can change. In this specific renovation project that I'm talking about, you know, they wanted to hold off because of the price of mechanical equipment has just skyrocketed. But when we took a look at it, it's like, you know, what's gone up even higher than your mechanical equipment cost and your project cost estimation is your ratcheting demand rate. If you take a look at your life cycle cost analysis and update it for the new numbers, it makes more sense now than it did before. So it's definitely a good tool to have at your disposal.
Hey, Brendan, real quick question. In that particular example, did the payback get shorter or longer?
The payback got shorter.
Wow.
And it was specifically because of the ratcheting demand rate. Just in case you're not familiar with the ratcheting demand rate, is in most commercial settings, you're getting charged not just for the kWh you're using over the course of a month, but how much you're using at any given time, especially now because there's so much grid capacity problems that demand ratcheting has gone up tremendously. If you're using something like a gym that might not be being used all the time, but when it does get used, it sucks all the power. Those can end up being extremely expensive with ratcheting demand rates. So another tool is energy auditing. This is typically used for renovations, but I want to stress that these are very helpful for new construction projects as well. Basically, it's a tool to justify renovations, justify energy conservation measures, and sometimes even the opposite. Sometimes you might find that what you've got is doing just fine. You just need to make a couple tweaks. If you don't know what an energy audit is, basically either you, plenty of campuses doing it in-house, and plenty of campuses hire a consultant. But an audit will look at all of the current systems in your building, including envelope if you want it to, and look at very low-hanging fruit, relatively cheap chunks to free up energy costs, which a lot of the times an energy audit and implementing the energy conservation measures suggested from that energy audit, sometimes that can be the biggest payback, or the shortest payback, I'm sorry, for any of these tools. And they can lead to tremendous cost savings. But as far as new construction goes too, often our clients, they'll use these as a proof of concept for new construction. So, if you have an idea or a concept of something you want to see in a new building that you have coming up, you can see how it performs in an existing one by sort of updating those systems, which is sort of a double whammy, right? Because you have a proof of concept that can further give you data for your lifecycle cost analysis and your budget requests. But you also know how it works, and if you're going to be happy with it. So using it as a test is pretty good, and it keeps the building chugging along so you don't have to do another major renovation. But yeah, just continuing to balance that tight budget, energy auditing's a fantastic tool for that. And then retro commissioning. Sometimes people use these terms interchangeably. I would argue that they're not interchangeable. Specifically retro commissioning, especially if you're doing this in-house, this can be by far the cheapest method to save operating costs. Building automation systems, sometimes they act erroneously for a variety of reasons. Maybe the new guy, he forgot to put the pump back to auto after he had it in hand for maintenance, and it's just been running for the whole year. Something as simple as that, or maybe it's just the BAS system that's throwing errors from a software standpoint. But occasionally doing a retro commissioning and making sure that your building is operating as intended is critical. We see things all the time, simple things like, I'd say one of the most common ones I run into is a hot water coil that's always on just a little bit. So you're always simultaneously heating and cooling your air. Not only that, but your fan's running all the time because you're not delivering 55-degree air anymore. You're delivering 65-degree air. Set point hunting is another one. Sometimes your deadband can get out of whack, and so everything's just constantly running. So I would classify retro commissioning as part of routine maintenance, really. But again, as far as an overall campus planning and in relation to our high performance design concept, knowing what is going on with your current facilities is extremely valuable data for any new projects or any new renovations. You sort of have to know where you are and where you stand and what works for your scenario before you can really responsibly tackle a new high performance building.
So just to bring this conversation back to the starting point, if you can measure anything you want, but if you don't have a goal in mind of where you want to get to, it's really hard to find the destination. And oftentimes, kind of going back to that original narrative, will help you get there. Everything's a feedback loop. So once again, if there aren't ways of measuring it, if you haven't been measuring it, part of it is sometimes setting up data points I think IBM has been doing some stuff also in the space of just occupancy within the building. We've got sensors for lights, for the heating, the cooling system, but even understanding how the students are moving through a building, or staff is moving through a building, or even the metrics of how many people are in a building at a certain point in time. All these tools and the digital world that we're kind of moving into with AI has created just this avalanche of data that we can use to help illustrate the story of why it's important to pursue what makes sense to pursuing.
And I want to also stress, I'm not just talking about these tools from a consultant standpoint. I am a consulting specifying engineer, but I also sit on my local downtown development authority for my city, and we're responsible for a small portfolio of buildings that are funded with public money. So these are tools that I use on your side as well, on the facilities side. Spending public money is sort of nerve-wracking. It should be nerve-wracking, and making sure that you're doing it right and you're squeezing out every single penny for any project you undertake, I think is imperative. So as far as implementing design, we've sort of hammered that point with the tools. It is incredibly important to have data to give to your consultants. It's important to have data to plan for potential new projects, but it's also important to have data to get those projects funded. We know how difficult it can be to make budget requests. And so when you go through these processes and you use all these tools and you generate these data points and these plans, you're not only ensuring that you're moving towards a quality product, you're making sure that your budget request and your proposal is defendable. Like we sort of mentioned earlier, it can be frustrating sometimes, but it is the people holding the purse strings job. It's their job to make sure that they're spending money responsibly and really understanding what they're getting into. So if you give them all the data that they need to determine that, yes, this is a good idea, your budget request becomes more defendable. If you do have sustainable goals and you do want to save energy for regardless of the reason, it can help you really convince your AVP or whoever you might be having to present your budget to spend those extra dollars up front because you did all the legwork on that.
Well, and sometimes even just finding a little bit of money in a pot in order to pull in an outside consultant ahead of when a project truly starts forming. It can be at a very, very early stage. We've seen it time and time again where we'll be asked late in the calendar year, hey, could we squeeze this in? Could we squeeze that in? Just to already start thinking about some of these things. We don't have a project number for it. We don't have anything other than this idea that we should be looking at our master plan more quickly because something has changed in the landscape around us. When COVID hit, all of a sudden, what happens when everybody stays home? All of a sudden, it's like, oh, we really should be figuring out how to. Unfortunately, a lot of us had to be reactive at that point. Global pandemics weren't exactly on my horizon a couple of years back, unless they were on yours, Brendan. I don't know, but things happen at all points in time, and sometimes just being well prepared and having a few scenarios already thought through gives you an opportunity when it's possible to strike while the iron's hot.
Yeah, so really the main concept we want y'all to leave here with as far as the types of tools we're presenting is, in the grand scheme of things, those tools are very cheap to implement, especially compared to new construction or major renovation. So what we're proposing for y'all is, if you end up with a little bit of money left at the end of the year, a surplus, or maybe you get to the point where you do want to continue having it as a line item each year, you can basically spend small dollars to really direct big dollars at the end of the day. Making sure you're doing it right and in a methodical way can really help your money go further. If you get an energy model or an energy audit done in December, that utility budget for next year, you'll see a little bit of wiggle room in there now, so you have just a little bit more to work with. And over the course of a few years, again, it's iterative, over the course of a few years, your budget becomes drastically different, and you can free up some funds to start doing some of the larger things that you want to do. And not only that, but doing this at the beginning, it helps make sure that the budget that you're putting in your scoping documents is accurate too. There's nothing worse than, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I wish we put a third question up, and that question would be, how many of y'all have had a project derailed just because there was a bad scoping document, just because whatever was sent out originally and the proposed budget, it was never going to happen for that. An example of that I have is, more than once we've had clients engage us for a new construction building, and it's like, okay, what mechanical system? They're like, oh, we'll tie it into our chilled water plant or our steam plant. Well, then we start design, and it turns out that steam plant is old and it's not running at full capacity, and they don't have the capacity to tie it in. So now that scoping document doesn't have it never had the funds for a building plant, and you can't tie it into the central plant. So that project is haywire before it even started. Any of those types of stuff, that's where your retro commissioning and your energy auditing comes in, making sure that you know what you have, especially if you're planning on tying into it.
Hey, one of the things that really is in your face, especially on this slide, is just seeing what a hero you are working on the physical plant, working on buildings in a campus. Buildings shelter 100% of the people on the building. The campus has to work for 100% of the people. But when you just look at where is money spent, how is money allocated, you're being asked every year to do more and more on a number that doesn't always necessarily grow as fast as inflation grows. And so this is really near and dear to us, just working on buildings, working on campuses, working on master planning, of how do we help situate each project, each idea to succeed.
Yeah, I was actually on a project. I was on a campus doing a retro commission relatively recently, and I was talking with some of the facility managers, and I come to find out that their facilities budget even went to things like, paper towels and yard signs and stuff like that. And with increasing costs and everything, it's difficult. It can be difficult to get things done on y'all's end, and we understand that. So we want to make sure that we're making your dollar go as far as it can.
So let's say we get to the point where something is moving forward. It's in the works. It's going out for bid. It's been funded. Well, actually, even before we get there, that's starting. Where did I start, Brendan? I started us at, probably step 7, right?
No, but basically, it's your planning is an iterative process, and that's a lot of work on your end. When you engage an AE, make sure they're doing their iterative process too. Each step of the process, from planning to design to construction, you need to be going over your goals and your designs again, just to make sure to work everything out in a manner that is getting you closer to your goal. Don't start on the wrong step like Ryan did. No, I'm kidding.
Glad to help.
Yeah. You want them to take your work and run with it in a responsible manner. You need to find a partner that will advocate to you. And it's not just to avoid having, your work just get thrown away. It's having their work get thrown away too. Doing this process on our end, making sure that we're really documenting everything and we're doing an iterative design process, it's insulating us and you against VE items. Some of these projects take a long time, and you can have staffing changes. You might have had an original AVP that approved a budget, but you've got a new one now, and they're questioning why they're spending so much on this building. If you document everything, you have a very clear answer as to why. And it's a lot harder to argue with something like that. So yeah, I mean, just it's always iterative. You always got to be tracking your target values. You always got to be tracking your data, and it's always got to be at the front of your mind and everybody's mind that's working on your project or even touching your project.
In fact, Brendan, you and I just experienced this recently. Right now with the escalating costs on everything, you always get to the value engineering stage. Sometimes you say VE or value engineering so many times that you don't even know what a regular budget even looks like anymore because everything's a VE. But we had, our table stake was to create a LEED building, and there were many reasons for it to actually truly be LEED. And it really came down to if we did VE, well, in this case, in the mechanical system, there would be no way for us to hit all the points, or we would be doing something that is just greening. It's quote unquote sustainable, but is it truly in the best interest of the project long term, or for the client long term? And it was a really great conversation because there was no headbutting. Everybody had the same goal. It was stated, and in fact, you know, we were able to advocate for the reason to keep it in there. The contractor was able to advocate for it. Even the owner was able to advocate for it. I mean, it was 100% success rate as far as, okay, this is one area that we just won't touch because it would change what we truly want to achieve with this project.
It goes beyond, you know, energy conservation measures too. Again, we want to make sure that when you think sustainable and high performance design, you're expanding beyond that concept that so many people tend to just think about or just assume is the only part of sustainability. I've seen, you know, welding tables get VE'd out of technology buildings. It's like, how does that even work? Then you're really compromising your mission then. So just the iterative design process, documenting everything, and have an answer as to why is extremely important to make sure that your vision remains. When the building's built, your vision is still there. It doesn't just get blown to pieces and swept under the rug.
I guess I advanced the slide a minute too fast, but
No,
here's just another example of being able to use it, not just around energy use, but kind of looking at the very early stage in a master planning. You don't necessarily need, you know, super fancy graphics. Depending on kind of your background, this could be something that you're able to even do internally without even having to go out of house. But being able to put together that matrix that we were talking about, this is a format of one matrix, and then being able to highlight in something that's meaningful for you that communicate kind of where your goals are, what's the most important. And you know, sometimes it could be the initial cost, it could be the efficiency, all these different things. But you know, in this scenario, just being able to lay it all out very simply allows different stakeholders to weigh in at a very, very early stage and provide the feedback that's important to once again kind of establish what will help make the project succeed and becomes kind of the non-negotiables as you keep moving forward through the process.
And yeah, I mean, your target value too, we touched on this at the beginning, but I just want to reiterate, sometimes you are working with a limited budget. Sometimes maybe your campus grew faster than expected and you just need square footage and you're on a very limited budget. Following these steps is still important because A, it doesn't cost that much to follow these steps, but B, even though you're on a limited budget, that doesn't mean you can't and your consultant can't explore every avenue possible to make it go as far as possible. If you have a small budget, you know, you still don't necessarily have to go just pure code minimum. You should still see what you could get out of that budget because there is a time and a place for cheap buildings. I know I've heard a lot of people.
I've got a name for those, Brendan. I call them cheap and cheery. Sometimes cheap and cheery is what you need.
Yeah.
But
no, definitely. I've heard frustrations from clients and facilities managers where, you know, consultants on our side or maybe their AVPs, like they're just not understanding that they need square footage, and that's the driving factor now, and that's okay. You can still put the high performance design methodology to that and end up with the best product that you can, even if it is low budget.
At the way beginning, I kind of mentioned the idea of a flywheel. This is a process that was developed over many years as one way of kind of looking at a flywheel, where you can start at any step in here. Most of your projects probably are already existing buildings, so you're in the step number 6, this experience performance step. Going back to the different levers that we were talking about earlier, being able to perform retro commissioning or energy auditing or campus planning or master planning, just kind of looking at every square foot you have and what it needs to do to perform in such a way that it adds value to your campus. That all happens in the step 6. And once you start uncovering something that needs to be addressed, that's kind of the seek. That's this step 1, really diving in. And at the beginning of a project, really understanding the people, the process, the place, and the perception. And how all those four drivers really are advancing the organizational purpose. Once that's kind of established, once everybody that's in that original stakeholder team and usually a kind of a leadership group team understands what that needs to be, then you really dive into exploring the actual project that you need to advance with your organization. And that's where you're really understanding the purpose of that specific project, the mission, vision, and values of that. Your time and cost goals start becoming into focus at that point in time, and additional user groups and additional stakeholders. From there, you're really diving into that design process, that planning process, where you're getting into more granular specifics of the planning itself. This is probably the first stage where any drawings start getting generated, although you've already assembled the team as you're coming into this. And then design. 4 is kind of your traditional trajectory, and Brendan was talking about start in the right place, start at the right step. If you start at 4 and you hope to work backwards to steps 3, 2, and 1, you're pedaling backwards. So much will oftentimes change in your planning process that's where we've seen a lot of projects scrapped. And then we love it when things get built. Change is constant, and it's always fun to get a refreshed space, a new space, a better performing space. So during that phase, during the construction phase, there's definitely things to be looking out for, such as commissioning, really diving into understanding the materials that are going into your building. You need to be understanding that during the design process as well, but then making sure that it truly is being put together in a way that lines up with your expectations. And then never sell yourself short on the training that especially if you're taking on a new building or you've done a retro commissioning. Training is ongoing. Technology is always changing. We're learning every day. You're learning every day. It's just a continuous cycle. And so this is kind of what we envision when we talk a little bit about the flywheel and your projects and your planning kind of being all throughout this across your campus. This is the end of the continuing education portion of this presentation. We do have some minutes available here at the end for some Q&A. Very excited to open this up to any questions that you might have, and we can talk more specifically about things or in more general terms. But thank you for having both Brendan and myself on this call today to share with you perhaps a slightly broader way of looking at high performance building design.
Yeah, it's something
well, right
that...
now go ahead.
Sorry, go for it, Billy.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Ryan said. We appreciate y'all being here. It's something that I'm personally very passionate about. I know Ryan is too. Our contact information is down there. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or comments or anything like that. This is what we like doing.
Okay. Looks like we have some questions coming in. Okay, we have a question. In the slide that had the 3 site options with the colored chart, how are those ratings generated?
That one wasn't very scientific. That one was, sometimes you can already have a ranking system set up ahead of time. Let's say when you're reviewing bids on a project or something like that, your institution probably has a ranking criteria of how you would rank the bids that come in on the project. This one, since it's such an early stage in the project, and in that case, it was building out not necessarily a facility for a place of higher learning. It was actually for an industrial use. They weren't necessarily, they didn't have an established system. They weren't working on 1 million, 2 million, 3 million square feet of space. They had 120,000 square foot, and it was, how do we expand well? So we didn't necessarily have a system in place that was a ranking. It was more the people in the room, the stakeholders in the room were determining, this is important to us, this is less important to us. And then we actually worked through it live. Once the colors started showing up on the screen, that kind of became the visual cue of trending one way versus another way.
But it is a good example of the iterative process. The goals, like Ryan said, can be anything you want. That's where your campus philosophy comes in. But this is just one example of the many ways you can use to track how your project goals are being met in order to select a bidder.
Well, in that case, it was even just going forward, right? It was just going forward. It was understanding this is important to us. This is part of our success criteria, and this ranks to us higher than this other area.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. Our next question is, are all high-performing buildings LEED certified?
No.
No.
High-performing buildings can be LEED certified, and LEED certified buildings also sometimes can be low-performing buildings. It's definitely possible to buy credits if you have a LEED project. So really what we want to instill is in order to define a high-performing building, it's your metrics and it's your project goals and it's your needs. So I would also say if you do have a LEED building and you do want certification, using this process too helps make sure that you're not actually buying points, that you are sticking to the intention of the LEED criteria, because with anything there's like the intended methodology and there's a way to, for lack of a better term, cheat it. And you can definitely do things that aren't necessarily the best for your facility, but will get you a point. So
it's about keeping your consultants honest, right? Like, are you doing it for the plaque on the door, or are you doing it because it's part of your mission, vision, and values? We actually have a project going on right now. Well, before I even go to that, oftentimes states will mandate that you have projects that you've gone through, the LEED checklist on or something like that. What I find really interesting is saying, okay, we've done that checklist. We understand that we don't need to submit, but at the same time, how close can we truly measure the performance once we're done going back to that checklist versus saying, oh, it's something that we did, we checked it off the list, we put it in a file drawer someplace, or we have it in our email system, or we've done that box because it's required of us. You've got very motivated people that work on these things day in, day out, and we're always trying to get a little bit better at what we're doing. So it's a challenge. Sometimes it is just playing the game to find how you get the points, but that shouldn't be why you're doing it. You're really doing it because you have a deeper desire to make a difference.
Okay, well, thank you for that answer. Our next question is, I really enjoyed the content of your presentation. Can you comment on the implementation of prevention through design to ensure the built environment is as safe as possible for maintenance workers. This is tied to productivity and reliability of the built system. This is tied to the productivity and reliability of the built system.
I love that question.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So going back to that concept of target value designs, those are measurable targets. That's where you would define them. That's the type of stuff you want to implement into your philosophy and make sure it ends up in your scoping document. A couple specific examples, things like, especially, a lot of the modern systems, especially if you're going for what we call solar ready, all electric, you're using a ton of refrigerant. So making sure that if that's the route you're going, that you are planning around, purge fans and just the amount of refrigerant in an enclosed space, adding that as your target, making sure to meet, for example, like ASHRAE 34 is an excellent target. And you can exceed that as well, but also things like roof access and everything, those are all targets that you can put into your scope and follow the iterative process to make sure it's working best for you. And I think that's a fantastic question and a fantastic example, because that's an aspect that people might not think about if you were to talk about sustainability, but it's absolutely part of it. Sustainable growth is, making sure that your facility staff can maintain them in a safe manner.
And one thing that I want to point out, building codes, the Intergalactic Building Code, I think is what it's called, IBC. Everybody should be familiar with that. Those are design minimums. They aren't always the best thing. It's what everybody's agreed to, that at a minimum you should be reaching this level. And sometimes if we look at what other countries are doing, we may or may not agree with everything that we see happening in building cultures around the world. But one example, in England, I believe that they also have a requirement for the construction of buildings. So as you're designing your building, you actually have to think about the construction worker safety as part of your design process, so that you aren't creating unsafe conditions for the people putting the project together, which then, if you start thinking about that from a maintenance standpoint, we all love LED bulbs because they're 50,000 hours, but 50,000 hours comes and goes, or sometimes a driver comes and goes. And if you got to go 45 foot up on a ladder just to change a bulb, you've created a potentially very unsafe situation for your maintenance staff, for your facilities folks. So those are things that you could start codifying, if you need to, into the language of how you want to do business as your institution, and what standards you have for the design team that you bring on board.
Okay, it looks like we have time for one more question here. Are there grants or other mechanisms to get money to help with HPBD?
Absolutely. It varies from state to state. Since we're talking to the national APA instead of one of the state chapters, we'll keep it generalized. But I would say, on the grand scheme of things, a lot of y'all, I'm sure, know this, a lot of y'all might not, but a lot of colleges have grant writers on staff who can help you with that and help you research that. And if you don't have one on staff, your state or your county or other municipality definitely has one. So that would be a good place to start. As far as specifics, I know we do a tremendous amount of work in Wisconsin, because that's where we're based out of. There's a group there called Focus on Energy that can provide grants for sustainable and high performance design. Down here in Georgia, Georgia Power provides a lot of grants. It can be sort of daunting to pour through them, but there's a lot of available help out there for you. I would also recommend you pitch that as a question to your consultants as well. because that's something that they can help out too.
Yeah, that's really good. Ask the folks that you brought on board because they're familiar with the area that your facility is in. Some of these grants are pretty obscure, and some of them are tied to federal money. Some of them are state money. I know that solar power, I think there was something that was on the federal level, but I think that's phased out now. I haven't actually had to look at solar power for a little bit. So I guess I can't be more specific about that right now, but there are websites out there that really kind of focus on pulling together that data of what's publicly available or privately available. But I really like what you said, Brendan, as well.
Yeah, and that's a great question too, since we're talking about making your budget go far. The best way to pinch a penny is to make somebody else pay for it. So yeah,
Pick
grants
up a rock and see if there's money under it, right?
Yeah. So yeah, pursuing grants is definitely an excellent way to help get some of your goals in place.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for a very informative presentation. And to our attendees, as always, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. So until next time, be safe, stay healthy, and be kind to one another. Thank you so much. Bye-bye now.